Greetings, Mathemateurs. Today's video blog post will be about operations with fractions. For this whole demonstration, we're going to be using just two simple benchmark fractions, a half and a quarter. First, let's look at the simple equation 1/2 plus 1/4, and let's look at a couple of models that make it easy for us to do this. We're going to use an area model here to figure out how to add a half and a quarter. In this case, I'm using a rectangle that's 2 by 4. I could have used one that was 2 by 2, but I'm going to stick with a pattern here and use the denominators to tell me the dimensions. So in this rectangle, a half is going to be the same as 4 blocks, and a quarter is going to be the same as 2 blocks. Since 1 block is the same as 1/8, we can write a half and a fourth in terms of eighths. So 1/2 equals 4/8, 4 blocks or 4/8. 1/4 equals 2 blocks or 2/8. And 4/8 plus 2/8 equals 6/8. We can simplify 6/8 to 3/4. Okay, let's look at the subtraction operation with a half and a quarter. We use the same array we used last time, a 2 by 4 array, because halves are easy in one direction and quarters are easy in the other. I can think of halves as this part, and I can think of quarters as this part. So just like we did last time, 1/2 is 4 blocks or 4/8, and that's a half is 4 blocks or 4/8, and a quarter is 2 blocks or 2/8. Simple subtraction with similar denominators, and I get a result of 2/8, and simplified, that's 1/4. We talked about this a bit in our last video on how to add and subtract fractions using an area model. Moving on, we come to multiplication, and we're going to stick with those same two fractions, a half times a quarter. In this case, we're asking the question, what is a half of 1/4? So in this case, I'm going with my brownie model, and we're going to think about a square pan of brownies as being the whole. Okay, so we read it as a half of a quarter, so I'm starting off with a quarter pan of brownies. We can only guess what might have happened to the rest of the pan. And I'm going to divide that quarter pan of brownies into two pieces in order to figure out what half of that quarter pan of brownies actually is. Well, half of that quarter pan of brownies is a piece about as big as this section right here. In order to answer the question, what's a half of a quarter, I need to be able to say how much of the whole pan is this piece I've just identified. Well, if I look at the pan as a whole, it looks like my piece right here is one piece out of 8. In which case, when I make a half piece out of a quarter pan of brownies, it looks like that part right here is about 1/8. Final operation for tonight, for today, for whenever you're watching this, is division. We're going to look at what 1/2 divided by 1/4 equals. And before we jump into the fraction part, we're going to think a little more conceptually about what division actually is. If I'm dividing 6 by 2, I'm asking a question. I'm actually asking several questions. The partitive question is, if I have to share 6 among two groups, how many will each group get? For our purposes, though, we want to think about the quotative approach to division, which is asking the question, how many times can I subtract 2 from 6? Well, it's pretty easy to see that I can subtract 3 2's from 6, which means that 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the equation 1/2 divided by 1/4 is actually asking how many quarters can I subtract from a half? Okay, so here's a half a pan of brownies. If I ask the question, how many quarter pan of brownies are there in that half pan of brownies? The answer is pretty obviously 2. Here's 1 of the quarters, here's 2 of the quarters. Another way to think about division of fractions is to think about measurements or measuring cups. In a half cup of flour, how many quarter cups are there? Well, if you own a set of measuring cups, it's pretty easy to see that if you want to fill up a half cup, you need 2 quarter cups. We can also use a running model to think about a half divided by a quarter. In this case, let's imagine a track that's a quarter-mile oval. And actually, many high school tracks are quarter-mile ovals. In order to run a half mile, how many ovals do you have to run? Again, it seems pretty straightforward that it's going to take 2 of those quarter-mile ovals to get up to a half. There are 2 quarter miles in every half mile. When you're solving fraction equations that involve addition and subtraction, think about the area model. Turn the squares in the rectangle into blocks and add or subtract as needed. When you're working with multiplication, think of the word of. A half of a quarter means taking a model of something that's a half and taking a quarter of that half and figuring out what part it is of the whole. Here's my half pan of brownies. Now I need to find out what a quarter of it is. I divide my half pan of brownies into quarters, 4 equal pieces. Now I have to figure out what one of those pieces is as a fraction of the whole. If I look carefully, I can tell that this piece right here is 1 out of 8 pieces. Therefore, it's 1/8. Finally, when you're thinking about division, think about how many pieces I can subtract. In this equation, I'm thinking, how many quarter pieces can I subtract from a half piece? Inside every half piece are 2 quarter pieces.